I'd like to welcome all of you to the second lecture in our Silver Anniversary Celebration lecture schedule for 1991. When the committee actually got together almost a year ago, one of our thoughts was to actually invite back lecturers for this year's series that had previously lectured in the 24 years at the college, and people who had made an impact by whom they were and what they said. We really haven't followed that to a great degree, although our speaker this evening, called Westmoreland from Cincinnati, Ohio, is one of those people who is returning for a second time to the College of Architecture and Planning here at Ball State University. I might just recognize a few people in the audience this evening who had dinner with Carl Westmoreland, and people who I am happy and glad that they're here in the college, and very happy that they attended. I'd like to recognize Dr. Sam Abrams, who's superintendent of the Muncie Community Schools. And I'd like to recognize two of our, I think, very, very important neighborhood activists here in this community, both Alice McIntosh from the Industry neighborhood and Pam Flint from the East Central neighborhood. And has Ralph come over? Did Ralph come over? No. And the other person I'd like to recognize, who some of you have worked with and who has been a friend of our college for a long time. In fact, was a student of mine back in '73, so we go back more years than either of us care to tell. And that's Patrick Murray, who's the head of community development for the city of Muncie. We welcome all of you here to the college, and we thank you for making the dinner with Carl a very, very nice event. I've always said, I guess I told and by the way, I just want to let you know, although it's not going to show, but Carl Westmoreland began this morning presenting to a senior sociology class at 8 o'clock. And he also presented and gave presentations to 2 studio classes this afternoon. Carl used to run track. I guess that was a little bit like the qualifications, Carl, and you've made the finals, so here you are. Carl is presently the president of the Westmoreland Development Company, which is a private real estate development company in Cincinnati, Ohio, who have combined neighborhood revitalization, historic preservation, and adaptive reuse, and have very much been involved with citizen involvement in the planning and design process. Carl is recognized internationally. He has lectured and studied not only in this country, but in Germany and Poland and Italy. He was also, he was in Poland twice, sent by the State Department on exchange programs, and he was also one of 6 people to go to the People Republic of China as part of a State Department mission to establish a cultural exchange agreement, which was ratified by the U.S. Senate in 1985. Carl has been a consultant in various capacities to over 50 U.S. cities, basically involving citizen involvement and the idea of not-for-profit corporations that guide their own or guide the destiny of neighborhoods in our inner cities. Just to give you an idea of the range of involvements of Carl, because I think for me that's one of the things about Carl that is most impressive, is his ability to work with an incredibly broad range of people to bring them together in various partnerships to effectuate change in our cities. He has been Vice President and Executive Director of the Cincinnati Housing Service. He was, for 10 years, a member of the board of the Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing Authority. He has been an adjunct or assistant professor of community planning at the University of Cincinnati, from 74 through 81. He's the past president of the Mount Auburn Good Housing Foundation, a not-for-profit neighborhood corporation which has been responsible for bringing in over $70 million of renovated housing and new businesses, which will be the focus of his talk this evening. He is also a past board member of the Board of Trustees for the National Trust for Historic Preservation from 74 to 84, and is now currently an trustee emeritus of the National Trust. I'm giving you this in opposite. Earlier, Carl began his own education, I found out, at Miami of Ohio. He was a Redskin and played basketball with Wayne Embry. And then, as Carl said, he stopped playing basketball and began making the dean's list when he transferred to Knoxville University, from which he graduated with a degree in sociology and in history. And then he received a master's degree from the University of Cincinnati. In trying to think of a way to introduce a speaker, usually a day or two before, I try to either look for something or respond to something that I've heard that makes sense. And for those of you that were in Carl's class this morning, this is a repeat. But yesterday at Mass, our priest talked about St. Thomas Aquinas and talked about silence. And through our silence, we actually will condone actions. And if those actions are not right, by us remaining silent, in a sense, we give our approval. And as I said this morning, I think this evening we have the pleasure of listening to somebody that has never remained silent when there was wrong to correct. And it is my absolute pleasure to present Carl Westmoreland from Cincinnati, Ohio.
I'd like to thank each of you, particularly Tony Costello, for having given me such a warm and personal welcome here at Ball State University. And I'd like to thank the residents of the industry neighborhood, Alice McIntosh, who was responsible for getting with Tony and providing the energy and the belief in what we've been involved in to invite us to come in. The thoughts I'd like to share with you this evening are about my involvement with my neighbors, not only in the neighborhood in which I live, but in the universal community in which I find myself on a day-to-day basis, of our effort to become involved in a constructive way in recharting our own course and having an impact on how we live on a day-to-day basis and live from a sense of involvement in what we do and what is done with us rather than to us. Some of what we will talk about will deal with planning and architecture, human interaction, sociology, psychology, education, and just plain old common sense. When we look at the built environment, and when we look at the human environment in which we find ourselves in the world today, because of the compression of time and because of the interaction, negatively interacting aspects of human nature quite often, we find ourselves wondering, how do we make the built environment and human interaction function in an effective way? And I think more and more we're finding that we haven't necessarily done a good job of that. More and more we find more people in the world today, and in America and particularly in our cities, who are alienated and have no sense of direction and no sense of involvement in who they are, and consequently are seen as a drain on a larger society. When people like myself make those kinds of statements and make those kind of pronouncements and operate from those kind of theses, usually we're being seen as Pollyanna. And the world has grown impatient with that. We've been involved for the last 25 years in an inner city neighborhood that you would call a ghetto. We call it a black Georgetown. And when whites hear us say that, they perceive us as being racist, arrogant. When the truth is that nobody in this society in particular likes people who don't like themselves. Nobody. There isn't a good basketball team or a good football team or a good corporation or a good university or a good fraternity that's made up of losers, that's made up of ordinary people. The good teams, the good organizations, the good societies are made up of people who have a high opinion of themselves, who understands what they have to contribute to the whole. I don't like people who don't think they're no better than anybody else. I don't want to be bothered with them. When I played basketball, I was the worst shooting person on the team. And the only way we could win is to be four other people that could shoot better than I. The cheerleaders didn't even like people who couldn't play well. Darn being cute, you had to score. The principal at an academic high school didn't like losers on the basketball floor or in the classroom. When we really think about it, the secret of success in America is built around those of us who have a high opinion of ourselves, who we are, where we came from, and what we bring to the table. I wonder sometimes if those of us who adorn ourselves spend an awful lot of time dealing with our physical persona really feel as comfortable and as secure as we ought to. And I wonder if that's the basis of our engaging in negative behavior, destructive behavior, self-destructive behavior. But that's another speech for another time. When you look at the inner city neighborhoods of America, when you look at Appalachian enclaves, my wife's a black Appalachian. She's from McDowell County, West Virginia. She's a coal miner's daughter. Didn't know there were black coal miners. There were. They were brought into the West Virginia coal fields in the 1920s as strikebreakers from Alabama. And underground, there was immediate equal opportunity to die, or to get a leg cut off, or to get lung diseases. But our perception of those communities is that the people who inhabited them in the past, who inhabited them, who live in them currently, don't contribute very much to the cultural and economic progress of our society. The unfortunate thing is the Appalachian community has bought into that stereotype. I wonder how much time, if any, has ever been spent in them understanding and being told from whence they came and what they've contributed to the building of the American industrial might. The coal that fired the 19th century industrial revolution was mined by the Appalachian and the black community, so that the Yankees up north could run the factories and live in the fancy Victorian houses. In the 1960s, when we began to look at our inner city neighborhood, where most of the black families had moved after the construction of I-75 in Cincinnati, what we saw were empty, underutilized buildings on the outside, and what we saw when we looked in the mirror were people who didn't like themselves, who had thoroughly bought into the myth, you ain't nobody, you ain't going nowhere, and where you live is nothing. That's the prescription for slum. That's the prescription for barrio. That's a prescription for ghetto. That's a prescription for third world, third class mentality, and worse yet, reality. As urban planners, as architects, as students of business and finance and government and public policy, as chemists, engineers even, the future of this country and its built environment and its economy and its politics, they're in your hands. But I invite you, if you will, to reflect on your predecessors and how well or possibly how they might not have done so well in building the society in which we currently find ourselves. For all the intellect and engineering prowess that it took for the Muncie Gear Company and Borg Warner and the Ball Corporation to do what they have done over the generations in this town, I'm wondering if there wasn't something missing, if there just couldn't been a little more input from other elements of our society so that downtown Muncie, which is a gem, wouldn't stand half utilized, in many ways abandoned and neglected. And I didn't come to knock Muncie. Yes, I'll be on the interstate tomorrow, and I'd like to come back. So don't misread me. Because Muncie is a microcosm of America itself. Books have been written about Middletown, and your reflection of, Middle West is a bellwether of where America is and how successful it's been. So don't feel sensitive about it. I did not come here to knock Muncie. When we looked at Mount Auburn and looked at raising our families there, for whatever reason, we decided to look at ourselves and to analyze where we wanted to go. And before going there, we decided to try to find out who we were. And if we could have the lights, I'd like to share with you who we thought we were. Cincinnati, being part of the Northwest Territory, It goes back to the early 1800s, 1806 to be exact, as a settlement. And oh, I've got the machine in my pocket. And as I said earlier today, the myth is that the black community in America did very little, if anything, to contribute to the progress of America. And here you see a black gentleman at the turn of the century on the riverfront in Cincinnati in a shanty town. And that's where he went to work during the day, laying the railroad tracks that connected Cincinnati and the streetcar tracks that connected Cincinnati with other places and other cities. Working, contributing to the history of Cincinnati and contributing to the industrial progress of the area. And in looking at these slides and in looking at these pictures, we decided that we owned a piece of Cincinnati, that we'd been a part of the building blocks of Cincinnati, and that we should be a part of its future. We built a colored orphanage home. We had businesses. The streets were clean. And as these pictures show you by the ages of the cars in the 50s and the early 60s, even the inner city neighborhoods of black Cincinnati were places in which we could be proud. The aerial view shows you the Mill Creek Valley, and Kentucky's to the far end of the picture to the south. The building to the right was a Sterling Hotel, the Cotton Club. That's where Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Sarah Vaughan, Lena Horne, Nat Cole, that was our cultural center. The larger community, the engineers, the architects, the planners, the United States government decided, that's a good place for a highway. Down came the houses, the churches, the dance halls, and even Crosley Field. Just to get the suburbanites from Detroit to Florida. With the destruction of the buildings, the orderly morning assemblies of the colored school in the ghetto was destroyed. That's the way they assembled in the school every morning. The leadership was dispersed. The laughter and the play of what you call a ghetto was dispersed and turned to anger. The dignity of a working class man was driven underground by the welfare workers who said, if you've got that man in the house, I can't help you. The guy who worked for the post office, his house was taken. And grandma couldn't rock on her porch anymore. This is the board of the 9th Street YMCA. You want to know where the black leadership is and where the black men are? They were there. And they ran our communities. But decisions were made for them, not with them. And they disappeared, and many of us were dispersed to Mount Auburn. The picture that you see was taken 6 months after the early picture you saw, and that's what we inherited. 3 miles to the north, and already abandoned. We decided that wasn't going to happen anymore, that we were going to create the same aura, and we were going to rebuild the same sense of dignity and the same kind of community. But first we had to look back at what we'd been and where we'd been and what we'd contributed to the whole milieu of Cincinnati. We took ADC mothers, we took college professors, we took angry young black men, and we sat down and we began to plan for ourselves. We began to use grant money. And we began to take action to deal with our own future. This car was that way for 2 years. And we kept calling the city and asking the city to move it. And this was our first project. We turned the car over, put it on a trailer, and hauled it off to the junkyard, and came back with $15 and profit, and then we bought a bottle of Jack Daniels and had a celebration. Community action. Look at the view of the city to the neighborhood that we and everybody else was calling a slum. One of the things we did in analyzing ourselves and looking inward, we found out very quickly what we didn't know. And we decided if we were going to borrow the money and make the change that we wanted to make in our neighborhood, we had to bring in people who sometimes did not look like us, but who had the same goals that we had, but who were willing to deal with us on a level of self-respect, mutual respect, to help us get to where we want to go. The gentleman with his hand raised is a vice president of corporate finance for the Kroger Corporation. And he helped us learn to read a balance sheet. The gentleman with the beard is a college professor for the Environmental Protection Agency at the University of Cincinnati. The gentleman on the phone is an attorney who helped us incorporate, and he was calling the state attorney general that day to find out why our papers had not come back. We formed a nonprofit development corporation, and we went to work. My wife, with her hand over there, sat on our education committee. The other people were involved in housing. One of our first projects was to buy the neighborhood brothel. We couldn't get the police to raid the place and close it, so we bought the building. It is now the Mount Auburn House. It became our health center. We outgrew the health center, and it has since moved, but it's now an office building. The absentee landlords that we picketed, we bought out. This 1870s building and the playground tells you more about how the city felt about us than anything. Give them some sewer pipes and put some paint on it. You can tell it was the late 60s. This is 1967. We were able to do a couple of things. We not only bought the building, but we struck a deal with the contractors and the unions. You work on our buildings if you train the young men in our neighborhood to become carpenters, electricians, plumbers, etc. If you don't, we'll take our money elsewhere. We had to rebuild cornices and soffits and box gutters. Same building in the rear. Again, we told the architects, put the building back the way it was at the turn of the century. Don't make it look like low-income housing. We got the parents involved to make sure the guys showed up for work. And we began to move in our old people who'd been displaced by the highway. You remember the sewer pipe? Because we'd finished the building, we were able to go to the city of Cincinnati with our own design and begin to build a gathering place in what had been the park. There's a building finished, and there's a park finished. All of this is subsidized housing. Low-income families live there, families that you have stereotypical images of. And we've received international awards for design and excellence on every continent with the exception of the African continent. And there are no broken out windows, there's no scandal, because we own them, we manage them, and we're paying the mortgages. Guess who the bad guy is? I mean, he had so little respect for us, he wouldn't take his hat off while he took our money. Wait till you see what we bought from him. We formed a partnership. We were able to form partnerships with the city of Cincinnati, with the First National Bank of Cincinnati, with the Kroger Corporation, with the private sector, because we'd begun to find ourselves, because we had a sense of direction, had goals, and were willing to make a long-term commitment to build a new community. So we started. And with the money we had, we tried to pay attention to detail. And our architect, who's Bruce Getzman, and I can never laud him enough. Bruce, with his German upstate New York background, always had sensitive interaction with the residents. And they dictated how the spaces were to be used. And he used his skills to implement them. Bruce responded to our concerns about density, about texture, and about making the place what we felt was a habitable environment. So what you've seen in a very brief presentation is the way we approached where we live, but more importantly, we've begun to deal with who we are. In a neighborhood of 11,000 people, we house 1,500 of our neighbors. Who are we? We're a nonprofit, neighborhood-based development corporation. The board is predominantly black, predominantly female, and we determine who lives there and under what circumstances. We determine how the houses are maintained. We collect garbage every day. You don't know of an inner city neighborhood in the United States where garbage is collected daily. We own our own garbage truck, because that's what we decided to do with our money that's generated from our rents. To make that to begin to happen, and this is where you come in, we had to find people who were willing to deal with us after we were sure that we could deal with ourselves on a basis of equality, understanding what they could get out of it. First of all, we left our personal social agendas at home. I could go on for the next month telling you without stopping how racist America is. But if you're going to borrow money from white banks, it's got to be prime plus 2. And when this session is over, don't tell me what white America owes us. I'm a Democrat, a liberal Democrat. But the world works by Republican rules, prime plus 2. Democrats borrow money, prime plus 2. Your older brothers and sisters who drive BMWs or whatever, they bought them at prime plus 2. Master charge, there is nothing in the world, nobody's having a sale if you buy something with a master charge. You know that? You're buying something on sale that's been reduced by 10%, and then you're paying the master charge 18 to 23%, and you don't complain. You line up signing for the privilege to get ripped off. So don't come to me talking about borrowing money from a bank and what they owe us for what our grandfather did. Yeah, he did, and he didn't get paid, and he got ripped off, and they don't like us, and they'd like to send all of us back to Africa. We ain't going, so let's stay and pay to stay. And let's stay and create a physical environment over which we have some pride and some control. Out of the slides you've seen and the slides you're yet to see, we built an environment where we began to have an impact on the school system. And that's why you saw my wife in the picture, because she was chairman of the education committee. And very shortly, we were able to convince the Board of Education over a period of years to put alternative schools, magnet schools, in our neighborhood rather than in the suburbs. Because the suburbanites could come into our neighborhood without getting mugged, because we drove the drug dealers out, because we own more property in the neighborhood than anybody. You can't sell drugs out of my buildings. Hear my arrogance? They're my buildings. I pay the mortgage every month, and when we don't pay it or something goes wrong, the First National Bank doesn't call you, it doesn't call the white liberals, it calls us. So I'll be damned if you're going to sell drugs off of one of my doorstops. And your Nike gym shoes and your crack can't work here. We pay the Cincinnati Gas and Electric Company $77,000 every month the Lord sends. And I'm going to let you sell drugs? That's my neighborhood. I don't care how many weights you lift. But what really makes that work for the future chief of police of the city of Cincinnati, who's here in this classroom in the year 2000, if you don't enforce the law after I sell the ticket, then I can't deliver the goods back to my neighborhood. And if you don't respect me and my bluster, it won't work. If you get hung up with the way I look or the fact that I don't shave, it won't work. So as policymakers, as decision makers, we've got to understand that inner city communities and America in general can only work if we begin to respect ourselves and then begin to respect the resources that each of us brings to America's table and how we make a transaction so that we have order, so that we have livable places. We need to begin to understand that when you build a highway through a black neighborhood or through a Spanish-speaking neighborhood, or that you bulldoze an Appalachian village, you are going to create displacement in middle and upper middle class white communities. Maybe you should go and talk to the people in those minority communities and say, what does it take to make where you live work? If nothing else, out of selfishness. If we look at the public purse in America, and I've said this all day long, it's constricting. And with $1 trillion that we've wasted in building a war machine that's now going to get sand in it, at the cost of $3 billion a day, and I don't see anybody running toward the door to volunteer to go there. When that's all finished, there will be no public mandate to come home and do a lot of public-spirited projects. So I think it's incumbent upon us, those of us who are going to be policymakers, to look at our existing resources, our human resources, our physical resources, and determine how we can make them work. And we can make America work much better if we begin to give real recognition to not only our differences, but our collective skills. We don't have to like each other. That's not my reason for being here. But the whole democratic experiment, as it's discussed in the Federalist Papers, as Thomas Paine talked about it in his Common Sense, government is as a result of man coming together and giving up some of his or her individual rights for the common good. And we've made that work well to a point. But the chaos in the American city, the deterioration in the American city, in my opinion, has resulted quite often because we stopped that interchange. We stopped that collective and constructive discourse because there's been an absence of communication on a two-way basis. And before I'm accused of accusing one element in our society as being responsible for it, I think that's beyond discussion. I don't think it's important anymore. I think what's important is that we begin to understand a need to move on and move together for common good. The schools in my neighborhood must work. My children must become engineers and architects. They must be competitive with those of you who are guaranteed a job at Ball because you're related to Mr. Graham. or you must get a cell ready at the Indiana State Penitentiary at the cost of $30,000 a year for the rest of his adult life. And that's a public policy decision that we consciously need to address. We can't sweep that one under the rug. We've got to confront the fact that that young man or young woman has to muscle up to the responsibility then of mastering the opportunity to be an engineer, an architect, or an accountant. And don't tell me what it's like to be in a predominantly white institution and suffer the innuendos and all the other problems that you suffer. You're right. You're absolutely right. But you don't whistle in the dark when you're walking home. Why whistle here on a campus like this? Nothing to be afraid of. And there's nothing wrong with failure. If you flunk a course, take it over. If you flunk a course and you got an IQ above 85, it's because you weren't studying. And somebody's got to tell you that. If you flunk a course, you're doing dishonor to where you came from and where you're going. You can't be my leader. You can't be my son's leader. You can't lead yourself. And yeah, I'm jive. We're too fragile as a society to have not learned the need for effective cross-cultural interaction to not only build better physical places, but build whole communities. My 25 years experience in working in neighborhoods has given me a firsthand love affair, painful love affair, with the hopes and ambitions of people who don't have a lot of material things. But all of us secretly sneaks and peeks at the mirror and says, I'm somebody. And what I'd like to see is the whisper become a shout and a song, a work song. But there has to be a willingness for us to give even after we've gotten tired. For those of you with the skills to make physical things happen, there has to be an openness to understand what our needs are. And for those of us with the needs, there have to be the will to be responsible to take care of what we need to make it live. The experience that we had in Mount Auburn was not unique. And I'd like to show you a couple other places. Could we have the lights again? I've been wanting to show Miss McIntosh this slide ever since I got off the expressway. And it would happen because she'll never believe me. I came in Saturday, I was 2 hours late because the fan belt broke on my car. And then I told them that the street on which they were having their celebration reminded me of the street where my great-grandparents lived. My great-grandfather built that house in 1890. And my great-grandfather took care of a Victorian mansion for a white family in Cincinnati. And we've maintained the house, and next year my brother will restore it. One of the reasons we kept the house is because it was important to our family. That house is owned by a classmate of mine from high school. And it's very modest. It's just like the houses here in Industry neighborhood. And again, we jacked it up in the air, took all the termites out from under it, and restored it. And we did it because her grandfather had built the house. There you see the house finished. We began to research the history of the area, and we worked with the residents about how they'd come to a place called Wyoming, Ohio, and lived by the railroad tracks, of course, in the 1890s through the turn of the century, and what they'd done to help build that community, and how important their presence was there. And that little old gray, dinky house you saw is now a Victorian cottage again. Modest? Yes. Architecturally important? No. Means something to a family? Holds them together? Yes, you're darn right. We treated that house just the way you would treat anybody's suburban kitchen. It's a shotgun houses, of course, for the black factory workers at the turn of the century. But they contributed to the industrial wealth of that region, and we felt the houses should be preserved and treated with respect, and the people who live in them feel good about themselves. You've seen that? This is another neighborhood. It looks like your town, I'm sure. This was an abandoned parsonage at a Methodist church. Paint and spit and polish. This house was built by a black bricklayer who left Kentucky in the mid-1800s. There it's coming back. Would you believe they had all that stuff stored in the basement? They'd given up. I went in the basement and told them how beautiful it was, and all that stuff's old-fashioned. You know, it's old-fashioned in our neighborhood, it's antique in yours. That's junk. Don't nobody need that old junk. Hey, that's antique. That's Wedgwood. That's Chippendale. That's important. You're important. That's what builds neighborhoods. And that's the way the Calamese Victorian cottage looks today. It's not impressive. It's home. It's a part of a neighborhood. The neighborhood leaders in this neighborhood in Madisonville began to rally around those old houses. Taking a page out of our experience in Mount Auburn, they really began to believe that they could make a difference. And they went to work. And they met. This is my college roommate's daughter who became my assistant. And these are young men we train to restore buildings in the neighborhood. And the city joined the partnership and began to repave streets. Now, Ms. McIntosh, why you see why I said I felt at home? Am I off the hook? This is owned by a single head of household working mother. And that's owned by a young black entrepreneur who chose to stay in the neighborhood rather than go to the suburbs. And of course, the church had to do their thing. And the business community got involved, and the work continued. A savings and loan built a branch, and the city began to plant trees. And then we reached our Waterloo. If you recall, we had several meetings. If you saw the meetings and you saw the ordinary people sitting in those meetings. And the purpose of those meetings were to convince them to buy that ocean of abandoned veterans' houses that you see in front of you. And we approached the city of Cincinnati with a plan to buy those houses with the help of Mr. Getzman again from the School of Architecture at the University of Cincinnati. And with the help of an engineer and some other technicians. And that's what we convinced them to let us have an option on. 100 acres of abandonment. We cleared the site, but left the trees because we had a plan. This was one of the most rewarding moments of my life. Working with ordinary people, both black and white. We bought a 100-acre site, and after 4 years, we were able to put that sign up 4 years and $120 million later. U.S. Shoes International Headquarters, Coca-Cola's regional headquarters. We re-subdivided the land. The courthouse plat has our individual names on it. We left the school. It is now used as a school for critical thinking for children who want to go to college from the first grade on. We put in roads and sewers. But we kept the trees because we designed the industrial park the way we wanted it to be, because we bought the land. We can have the lights. Again, what you've seen are buildings. Buildings that you see anywhere. The industrial park, you see them a dime a dozen. Care center. With the other $500,000 left after they opened the daycare center, of course they put it in high yield investment notes, municipal bonds, and the instruments that the fellows from Kroger told us to invest them in. And so the Neighborhood Development Corporation now has a $500,000 cushion and is a self-sustaining entity. It has now built another shopping center and another industrial park. Again, the board is a predominantly female minority board. In each instance, it's taken the same ingredients. A willingness on the part of the people who live in the community to identify their needs, to identify their goals, and to make a commitment over the long haul to work to make change. And what is the long haul? It's not 4 years, it's a lifetime. Community, the people like you and I, to respect, and the willingness on the part of the larger community, the people like you and I, to respect those needs and to honor them and respond to them with the tools that we possess to make them happen. I've shared with you my experiences as an adult. I've shared some of my dreams with you, some of my accomplishments with you, but those accomplishments really were the accomplishments of my neighbors. I think each of us dreams some kind of impossible dream, but it's not impossible if we're willing to work in that direction. And I invite you to join the team to make this a better community, to make this a better country. Thank you. I am tired. I've agreed to meet with another group after this meeting. I'm going to keep that commitment. I will take 4 questions if you have them. If not, you are quite welcome to go home and turn on your box or watch your favorite football team. No questions? Thank you. Yes, sir. Used everything from temper tantrums to things just short of physical threats, but we were always armed with a plan. And I found that to be important. It doesn't take much time to get people's attention. We had to have documents. We're trying to borrow $32 million now with the country looking at a recession. And I've got a loan officer at Chase Manhattan in New York waiting to see me. And I've got a 52-page document that has been scrutinized by the president of Taft Broadcasting and by a couple of other people, and we're going to make a sale. I'm going to put on a funny suit like this one or one like I had on today and go make that sale. To get the opportunity to do that, we've had to run off a couple of exploitive developers who want to gentrify our neighborhood. And when we went into the city and made a lot of noise with our, we go find the largest ladies we can and all the out of work brothers that we can find to go in and buy us some time. But after they go in and shake everybody up, we've got a plan. We walk up to the podium and pretend we don't know them. And we say, we have this plan that we've put together with the assistance of Mr. Getzman and with a market study by Mr. Ollinger, formerly vice president of the Kroger Corporation. And we did the same proposal that my white classmates make when they're out conning somebody out of their money. And we've had to, I'm a child of the 60s. This time in 1960, I was in jail in the sit-ins. Um, but those tactics only made an impact on America for a minute. You know, after a while, they got where they were willing to let us go to jail and stay. Okay? So what we've learned is to honestly be prepared to make a difference. When my wife worked on the education committee, we had a black PhD, Dr. Virginia Coffey, and we had the head, Mr. Gideons, Dr. Gideons, the head of the School of Education at the University of Cincinnati, who worked with our neighborhood education group. And my wife, who is an accountant, and she was the only college-educated black woman on the committee, and all the other ladies don't understand the language that educators use. And if you don't understand their language and the nuances of what they do, they'll just ignore you. So that's why we brought in the people from the university. Well, they helped us write proposals, but we used the uneducated people who are not formally educated to go into the Board of Education to disrupt their meeting to get some attention for the proposal that we had tucked under our arms. And they go for it every time. And then, you know, then there's this long drawn out series of meetings where they try to wear you out, thinking that, well, if we use enough big words and set up one of these planning processes, they won't come back. And we just vow to keep going until we ultimately see some results. And finally, the light turns on, because what we try to do is explain to the larger community what they're going to get out of this experience. Exchange can't be one way. You can't go to the bank and get them to do good works. You got to go to the bank and make them understand they're going to make money. You got to let the Board of Education, bureaucrats, the superintendent of schools, and the larger community understand that if you, in fact, initiate a new program in our community, you're going to make Time magazine. You're going to be able to draw in some new business from out of town. In other words, there's going to be some return for you. It can't be a one-way experience. And people who live in inner city neighborhoods, one of the things I try to get them to be willing to say up front, we don't mind you making money. We don't mind you getting elected as mayor if, in fact, you do make some change in our neighborhood. In fact, we'll campaign for you. There has to be some reciprocity. Yes, ma'am. The Over the Rhine is going to be developed by somebody else because the neighborhood leadership didn't early on identify its goals and get the ball moving. What they did was the Over the Rhine is a neighborhood just to the south of ours. And it's the largest collection of 19th century Italianate buildings in this part of the country. Procter & Gamble, Western Southern Insurance Company, Federated Department Stores, they're going to do it. And they're going to gentrify it. And the neighborhood leadership that used confrontational tactics, when they had center stage, they threw away a golden opportunity. I mean, after a while, it's like in a street fight. You know, you hit somebody twice, it doesn't hurt anymore. I mean, their face is numb. It doesn't hurt until the next day. And I think the larger community has lost patience with the confrontational tactics of those groups that ran the Over the Rhine. And you know, morally, I agree with their goals, but they needed to have taken their own destiny in their own hands. I believe that with anybody who wants social change, you know, you can't make other people do for you. What you want them to do is equip you to do for yourself. We don't need any more programs in inner city neighborhoods that make us dependent forever on the larger community. What we need is seed. yes, we need government assistance, but only that will help us get launched. And it needs to be understood that that's the way it's working. And seeing over the Rhine, it was a conflict. You had those socialist, almost Marxist advocates who were in the community who felt that the government and the larger white community should take care of the poor black and Appalachian people in that neighborhood. The funny thing was, the blacks and the Appalachians weren't saying that. They never got a chance at center stage. And for those of us who represent inner city neighborhoods, let's talk about that for a minute. We have to have the inner strength and honesty to articulate what our neighbors are saying. Because believe it or not, when I get back home, and I live in Mount Auburn, I've always lived there since I left home, my neighbors will know I've been here. And if I said something to you that isn't true, I won't be back. They'll vote me out of office. Or they'll just put word out on the street, he doesn't represent us. And so it's my responsibility to articulate what their goals and their needs are. Unfortunately, that did not happen in the Over the Rhine. Yes, sir. He's asking what were the first things we did to begin to make the physical change in our neighborhood. The first thing we did, and it was probably why some of you feel verbally assaulted by me, was that we had to pound into our own heads that we really had the capacity to make any change at all. Okay? And it's almost like, you play any athletics, tennis, anything? All right. You know that you can't go out and play a set of tennis without having trained or whatever it is, all right? So the match itself is anticlimactic to all this hard work. I ran the 100 meters and the 400 meters, and I had to run I hate running distances, but I had to run around the golf course at Miami University, 7 miles, just to run 100 or 400 meters. So by the time we got to the track meet, running against somebody from Ohio University was a piece of cake. And then plus the man would make us run the stadium steps. Who here has to run stadium steps? Oh man, what it does back in here and in here. So that when you finally look at a straightaway and ain't nothing but cinders, well, we went through a lot of introspection, an awful lot of denial. We had people to drop out. We had the good fortune to keep a focus. We had learned early on to state what our goals were in writing. And every time we got in a chicken fight, and there was one, something going wrong all the time, we'd have a meeting like this tonight, and we'd have this many people, and then 6 of us would go off and drink beer and Jack Daniels and figure out how we're really going to make it work. Okay? And we also had to learn some things, and we talk about this communications. The white man from Kroger, Keller would sit there and listen. He's a graduate of the Harvard B School. And Keller would say, Carl, you don't know enough about business yet for you all to do what you want to do, and you got to understand it. Go ahead and take an option on the property, but you're going to have to do some other things. You got to buy the property in clusters. We didn't understand that. And I don't know that most neighborhood groups understand that. See, because when we bought the property in clusters, our first little project looked like we had changed the whole neighborhood. That's a real estate development tactic. My degree is in sociology and history, my undergraduate degree. My graduate degree is in urban planning and urban sociology. I didn't know anything about economics and real estate development, and neither did any of my neighbors. So we had to listen to somebody. So yeah, it didn't happen overnight. And the pain's as recent as week before last. You won't believe, and I didn't think I was going to get into this. I almost brought a letter to read to you, and I decided it was private and that I wouldn't do it. But the letter was addressed to our board. We've had somebody appear from out of the clear blue that convinced a significant number of people on the Mount Auburn Good Housing Foundation board that we in fact should not pursue the $32 million real estate development that we've been working on for the last year and a half. And they just planted doubt. They talked about the Reagan administration. I mean, they've done a good job of one of the best groups of its kind in the country. And we've had to go back and repair that. We've had to go back and remind them of what we've been through. We've signed mortgages you won't believe. We've negotiated deals you won't believe. And they weren't paper deals, they were real. We've affected public policy, like in Glencoe, you missed it. The road going down the hill, the biggest project, the restoration project we did. We got the city of Cincinnati to put all the wiring in underground. There isn't a wire above ground in front of those 19th century buildings. And now all of a sudden somebody was able to convince some of the people on our board that we couldn't do that again. It was like we'd never done it. So yeah, you have those problems. And what we had to do is go back and pump up who we are and where we're going and what we've been able to accomplish. Last question. Yes, ma'am. Okay, we have 11,000 people in the neighborhood. And as I said, we house 1,500 of them. All right? Ma'am? How much? Yes, ma'am. Now, how many people come to the meetings? On a night like tonight, 10 or 12. On a regular meeting night, 10 or 12. If we're having a community council meeting, which is the umbrella group, 50. When something goes wrong, like outside speculators coming in or whatever, 300, 400. Or when the Cincinnati Enquirer says, I took the money to Sweden, 600. But we've got this core group that for the last 25 years that you can call at any time, day or night. And we have it's a funny thing about leadership and the responsibility of leadership. It gets where after a while you know that when you go down the street, like for example, when we were dealing with the drug dealers, the older black men and women did not get actively involved in that. But from their porches and their stairways and their windows, they blessed what we were doing. And little guys out there on the corner said, if I hit this old stupid man upside the head, all those old folks are going to tell who did it. So I just got to let him be. I can't whip him. And he knows it, and I know it. But he's not going to touch me because the old folk in the neighborhood are going to send him to jail. So they actively participate. It's just like the sanctions you invoke in upper middle class neighborhoods. If the folks don't cut their grass twice a week, you're going to stop speaking to them. And they're going to be real uncomfortable being there. Your kids won't play with their kids anymore. And they're going to get the hint, cut your grass or move. Now, you all don't have formal associations in those neighborhoods. But let me move in your neighborhood. See, don't you have a mass meeting? And, so we function pretty much the same way. And it's hard. And then also, we have to at times respond to personal needs in order to maintain credibility, and some of it is premeditated. I mean, sometimes we understand that if you don't go take care of so-and-so's needs and everybody knows that they have those needs, then your credibility begins to sink as an organization. So, it's political, it's common sense. You all have been wonderful. Thank you.